Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are perfect games that can do absolutely no wrong. Well, okay, these games are far from perfect. Over the course of Scarlet and Violet, we've actually seen a lot of really weird bugs that have had a massive influence over the games as a whole. While some of these bugs are pretty inoffensive to the competitive aspect of these games at least, other bugs are actually so insane that I'm genuinely surprised it took some of them several months to be fixed. With that out of the way, we have a lot of bugs to go over, so let's get started by mentioning one of the most infamous bugs in these games. Okay, I definitely lied when I said we're starting off with a bug, because this technically isn't a bug, but it's a pretty big error nonetheless for these games. The Scarlet and Violet games on launch actually had a fixed RNG seed that was pretty easy to abuse. This is a pretty clear case where the developers were fairly lazy with their games, and it showed to be a massive issue within the first couple of days. The RNG seed got solved within the first 48 hours, allowing players to essentially find out several perfect ways to do things that were completely against the game's code, such as making sure that you could guarantee hit 100% accurate Oko moves on your second attack, and ensuring that you would always avoid things like heat wave misses and landing crucial freezes 100% of the time. This was easily one of the worst competitive issues that the developers have ever let slide in any Pokemon game, but it technically isn't a bug. Despite this though, it's so egregious that I absolutely had to at least briefly touch on it. One of the most polarizing Pokemon in early VGC was easily Dondozo, and with his partner Tatsugiri, this was a menace in most formats. While I wouldn't say that Dondozo was exactly winning any events early on, it always had a lot of top showings, and one bug that certainly helped a lot of its usage was the bug that allowed Order Up to gain you stat boosts even if the target clicked Protect. This was a pretty polarizing interaction for early formats, especially because Dondozo was actually one of the best Pokemon at the time. While it was never number 1 in usage, it was typically a duo with Tatsugiri that ended up getting top 10 at least for most of the first few months of the games, and this bug definitely helped a lot with that. This wasn't addressed until March 2023, allowing for 4 months of regional events to happen, where players were able to use Order Up on Dondozo and gain a stat boost when they otherwise should not have been able to. While Dondozo usage didn't exactly disappear after this bug was fixed, it definitely redefined a lot of how Dondozo was able to play and overcome certain matchups, since Order Up now no longer was punishing a player from going for Protect on a crucial defensive piece. This was definitely one of the most destructive bugs in the pre-DLC meta, but it's far from one of the only ones that actually had an impact. This next bug is one that definitely impacted players on the single side more than the double scene, but it's still fairly noteworthy to mention. There was a bug regarding the new ability Cudchew in Scarlet and Violet, where it would actually reactivate every other turn after your first berry was consumed. While this definitely impacted Farigiraf significantly more, you would actually still see Tauros as well take advantage of this, as they were both pretty terrifying low tier sweepers. Thankfully, Farigiraf and Tauros both had far more noteworthy abilities in VGC, with Farigiraf taking advantage of Armor Tail and Tauros using Intimidate. So no one really tried to take advantage of this bug during any noteworthy events, but this definitely caused these two Pokemon to be very powerful low tier threats in the singles Wi-Fi scene especially. During this same time period, there was a bug though that actually impacted the double scene significantly, but it was only really for a single Pokemon. If you went for Substitute and a Pokemon used a move that would lower your stats or change them in some way, such as Diamond Storm or Make It Rain, it actually affected this Pokemon that used the move for a second time in that same turn. Considering Gholdengo was a fairly meta-relevant option at the time, this essentially gave any Pokemon with a Substitute a means of really slowing down Gholdengo's usage, as you could essentially get a second special attack drop for the price of one single Make It Rain on Gholdengo. I wouldn't say this exactly made Gholdengo a completely unusable Pokemon, but I'd be lying if I said this didn't hurt Gholdengo significantly, as a lot of Pokemon that otherwise had no business taking hits from Gholdengo could now essentially be used as pieces with Substitute, drop its special attack by 2 stages, and then suddenly have a really easy way to revenge kill it. While there was no other Pokemon this bug really hindered besides Gholdengo in VGC, it's still a pretty big nerf against one of the strongest threats in the format. Let's get into the Teal Mask DLC, and starting off, we have Hospitality, which had a lot of really weird interactions at the start of its introduction. There was a lot of messy things that mostly paired when you selected Weezing as your partner Pokemon with the ability Neutralizing Gas. Instead of healing up the Pokemon switching in like Hospitality should do when Sinistcha switched in, it instead actually heals up Weezing whenever it leaves the field, allowing Weezing to get 25% of its health back, despite the fact that the game will tell you otherwise when you make this interaction. There were definitely certain partners though, such as Terra Ogerpon, that would actually cause the game to just crash entirely, so there's definitely plenty of ways to make this into a really horrible bug that could absolutely punish an opponent who had no idea what you were going for. This is one of those bugs that I had absolutely no idea it even existed, and it just goes to show how much some of these bugs really just went under the radar. because this was a fairly exploitable bug that could have had real ramifications in competitive, especially considering that both Sinistcha and Ogerpon were fairly meta-relevant picks, and Weezing was actually getting a lot of usage at the time of this bug existing. Thankfully, this ended up getting patched out rather quickly for Scarlet and Violet standards, but it wasn't the only bug that revolved around Weezing's neutralizing gas ability. Let's actually talk about the reason I made this video in the first place. I was talking with a friend of mine who doesn't know the most about the competitive history of the scene, and she had actually asked me about all the nerfs that happened with neutralizing gas in the early Indigo Disc format. Neutralizing gas definitely had a lot of issues regarding specifically interactions with the Paradox Pokemon, as you actually were able to lead off with a Pokemon like Roaring Moon next to Weezing without having your ability neutralized. This is a pretty big deal for the Weezing and Roaring Moon duo, and it ended up causing this duo to actually do decent at certain regional events. But I think the most prolific impact from this usage actually comes from an online tour that Wolf participated in, where he ended up actually winning the whole thing. Now, this duo definitely could have still had some more impact in regional events if it did continue to exist, but thankfully it was patched out in time before the core really ended up getting polished off. I think this bug being fixed actually does give Weezing a real niche in the upcoming Regulation G format, as without it, I don't think we would have seen Weezing be used. However, specifically when you partner Weezing next to one of the Calyrex forms, since as one actually does not get blocked by neutralizing gas, you cannot stop any team that features Groudon, Koraidon, or Miraidon as the centerpiece that was partnered with a lot of different Paradox Pokemon, as they now can no longer get around Weezing's ability. Now let's take a break from some of these rather game-breaking glitches, and instead let's talk about one of the silliest ones to ever grace these games. Have you ever ran Knockoff on Okidogi as a means of pressuring the Psychic types that would otherwise hit you for 4 times super effective damage? Well, if you use Knockoff on Okidogi in the actual Scarlet and Violet games, it's actually going to just slightly back up its position every time you use this. It's a pretty funny move to watch happen, because Okidogi can actually back itself so far out of frame that it's completely impossible to see with the in-game battle camera, and it's really hysterical. Now let's get into the Indigo Disc, and one of the most recent bugs to touch the franchise was easily thanks to the introduction of the move Dragon Cheer. Now Dragon Cheer gives the Pokemon a boost of 1 stage to their critical hit, and 2 stages if that Pokemon is a Dragon type. The only problem is that if you use Dragon type before version 3.0.1 of Scarlet and Violet, you would actually be able to switch out the Pokemon that got this critical hit boost and then return it to the field while keeping the same boost to its critical hit ratio. This actually caused Dragon Cheer to receive a ban in VGC formats for early Regulation F, which was actually pretty unheard of. Not even Dondozo's Order Up got a ban, and I would argue this was a far more impactful bug. Well, I'm glad that at the very least Play Pokemon learned from their shortcomings over the 2023 and early 2024 seasons. It definitely is pretty interesting because this is actually the only bug that they addressed in this way, and it actually caused a lot of content creators to just cover this as the banned move in VGC, which is a pretty funny way to pitch a move that really isn't that offensive outside of its broken mechanic. Now, after the bug regarding Dragon Cheer was introduced, another far more sinister bug actually came to light in these games, and this features any sort of form-changing Pokemon, as well as everyone's favorite move in VGC, Ally Switch. Now, this bug was definitely pretty terrifying, and it essentially clones the Pokemon that got the form change over the Pokemon that ended up using the move Ally Switch. This meant that, for example, if I bring in a Minior and I activate its ability to change its form after it hits half of its health, I could essentially have that cloned with my Ally Switch user, so I would have 2 Miniors that are in that star form. Or if I had an Ice Face Ice-Q hit the field, I could have 2 Ice-Q that ended up being in that Ice Face form just because I clicked Ally Switch with an Arm Rouge or a Farigiraf. Now, this could actually lead to some pretty sinister results though, as for a Pokemon like Terapagos, for example, you could actually gain access to a Terapagos that had an illegal Terra typing, because it was displaying as the wrong Pokemon. I'm honestly shocked this never really received a ban similar to Dragon Cheer, because this essentially could be very easily abused, especially in an open team sheet setting, since you can now get Pokemon that were using Terra typings that they should have never had access to in the first place. And it definitely would have caused some serious competitive implications if it wasn't for the fact that all of the Pokemon that took advantage of this were either banned or completely unusable due to the fact that they just kind of suck. Now let's end this video on a bit of a lighter note and talk about a visual glitch that I actually just learned of at the time of writing this video. This is caused by any ability that forces redirection, as well as any move that takes 2 turns to charge. But for the sake of this, I'm going to demonstrate it with Electric Shot and the redirection ability Lightning Rod, as that's what DeWabbleFett, the person who found this, ended up actually showing in their video. Essentially, if you use Electric Shot on a Pokemon that does not have Lightning Rod, and then you attack the user of the Lightning Rod ability with any non-electric type move, it's going to say that the move was redirected despite the fact that no real redirection occurred on screen. This is a pretty inoffensive issue, and it's really confusing to explain, so I would just recommend following the video on your screen, as it's probably the best way to understand it. it took me about 5 or 6 watches to really pick up on how this worked. But it's pretty funny to see that even within an hour of me starting to write this script, that there was a new visual glitch discovered, showing that really we're not over these Scarlet and Violet bugs, despite the fact these games have been out for over a year. Were there any in particular that were your favorite, or any that you really like to abuse yourselves? Or were there any that just really frustrated you? Let me know down below, as I'd love to hear from you guys. Also, while you're on your way down there, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. We actually just hit 500 subscribers as of the time of this video going up, and if all of you guys who have not currently subscribed chose to subscribe today, we'd probably hit 1,000 very soon. Also, make sure you guys check out Kurt, who did an incredible job editing today's video. His links are going to be here on screen, and he does a great job editing all of our long form content, so I'd appreciate it if you guys checked him out, as he uploads a ton of incredible content on his channel. With that said, I'm going to see you guys next week for our next upcoming video. Until then, peace out, guys.